Straykids imagines when they start doing it while you are asleep, them as your husband. leeknow. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the fan. Yen slept peacefully, wrapped in blanket, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Beside her, leeknow. When his eyes drifted towards Yen, the edge inside him softened instantly. She looked far too peaceful to disturb, yet the mischievous part. Yen didn't move, still sleeping. That only encouraged him. He leaned in, brushing his lips against the curve of her shoulder, then the side of a quiet laugh slipped. What started as sneaky touches, testing how much he could get away with while Yen dreamt, slowly shifted into something else. Yen stirred slightly, a sleepy sigh escaping her lips. His heart leaped, but instead of retreating, he stayed caught between guilt and desire. When Yen's eyes finally blinked open, catching him in the act, he froze for a second, then grinned, suspicious, guilty, undeniable. Ian. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight when Ian finally slipped into the room. He had stayed up later than planned, finishing chores and scrolling through his. Yen was fast asleep, her breathing steady, the blanket bunched around her shoulders. He paused in the doorway, just watching, a nervous smile tugging at his. Quietly, he slid under the covers. The warmth of immediately seeped into him, and he exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders for a. His hand hovered uncertainly near her arm. Slowly, carefully, he let his fingers trace the curve of her sleeve, then her wrist. When Yen shifted faintly, his heart skipped. For a second, he panicked, pulling back, cheeks flushed, even though she was still asleep. When Yen finally rolled slightly towards him in her sleep, her face resting against his chest, he froze, then smiled wide. Even if you don't know it right now, he whispered into her ear, I love you more than I can say. And with that, he held her tighter. Changbin. The air in the room was heavy with late night quiet. Changbin lay awake, his bare chest pressed against the sheet. The blanket kicked low from the heat. He should have been sleeping too. He was exhausted from practice, muscles aching from hours in the studio. But instead of rest, all he. A low sigh slipped from him as he reached out, his palm smoothing carefully over. He told himself it was nothing, just comfort, but his hand. When Yen shifted in her sleep, he froze. Guilt flickered across his face, but it didn't last. He leaned closer, whispering against her ear. The words hung in the air, swallowed by the silence. He pressed his forehead to her back, drawing her into his warmth. Every part of him. When she unconsciously leaned back into his chest, his lips curved into a smile, soft and unguarded. He buried his face in her ear. I don't ever want to let go, he whispered, and though Yen slept on, though her eyes stayed closed, he knew she would understand because every touch, every kiss. Bangchan. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that only came late at night. Chan lay on the bed, his arm wrapped around Yen, his steady breath rushing. The first thing Yen noticed was warmth. At first, it felt like the usual comfort of Chan's arm curved around her. His steady breath. She shifted slightly, her eyes fluttering open, and found him watching her. Even in the dim light of the room, she could see the softness in his gaze. Sorry, he whispered, voice low and husky. Didn't mean to wake you. But the way his hand lingered, the way his. Chan had always been this mix of sweetness and mischief. By night, though, when the world was quiet and the two of them were hidden away, his need for her spoke. Yen pretending to stay drowsy just to see what he would do. He chuckled under his breath. The side of her face, her shoulder, her collarbone, each. Guess I got carried away, he murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. but I can't help it. Even when you're asleep, I want you close, always. Han. Han was wide awake again. It wasn't that he hadn't tried to sleep. He tossed, turned, even counted sheep. But every time he closed his eyes, he sighed, puffing out his cheeks. Not fear, he muttered under his breath, though a smile tugged at his lips. Yen shifted slightly, her hand sliding close. But the truth was, he couldn't stop looking at her. The way her lashes rested against her cheeks, the way her lips parted just slightly as she. At first, it was almost innocent. He was just curious, restless. But when his fingers lingered too long and he leaned closer, pressing his. Yen started faintly and he panicked for a second, pulling back. But when she didn't wake, relief washed over him. He laughed under his breath, nervous, guilty. When Yen finally shifted towards him in her sleep, seeking his warmth, his heart nearly burst. He wrapped his arm around her tightly. Seungmin. The glow from Seungmin's phone faded as he finally set it down on the nightstand. Practice clips, emails, even a game or two, none of it. She was sprawled across the bed like she owned the place, hogging most of the blanket. A soft snore escaped her, and he almost laughed. Cute, he muttered. And still, his teasing didn't match the way his chest tightened. Even when she was a mess, he thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Then, without really meaning to, he leaned down and pressed against her forehead. Once, twice, the contact made something stir inside him. If you wake up and kick me, I'll deserve it. But he didn't stop. His hand drifted under the edge of the blanket, resting lightly on. When Yen rolled slightly towards him, her face tugged closer to his chest. He froze for a second, then the corner of his mouth lifted on in the smallest. But the way his hand lingered on her, the way his kept returning to her skin, told the truth he would never admit out loud. That even in her. Felix. The sweet smell of cookies lingered faintly on Felix's skin when he finally crept into the bedroom. He'd been in the kitchen way past midnight, stress speaking, but the second he saw her bundled in the blanket, cheek pressed into the pillow, lips parted just slightly, all his good intentions vanished. His chest tightened. He slipped under the covers, careful and slow, but the mattress tipped anyway. She shifted, murmuring something in her sleep, and he froze. At first, he just lay there, soaking in her presence. The quiet rise and fall of her breathing soothed him more than any late night snack. The longer he stared, the harder it became to stop. He trailed higher, her neck, the curve of her jaw, his hand hovered at her. She let out a tiny sigh in her sleep, and he paused, heart racing. A guilty laugh slipped out of him, quiet and tender. I'm terrible. When she started and instinctively curved against his chest, he pulled her closer, whispering into her hair, even in your dreams, I hope you know I'm yours. Hyunjin. The apartment was silent when Hyunjin pushed the door open. He was later than he meant to be. Practice had run long and his sketchbook had the bedroom glowed faintly with the moonlight spilling through the curtains. There she was, curled up in the blanket, hair scattered across the pillow. He sat down, his bag stripped off his jacket, and finally climbed onto the bed beside her. The mattress tipped and she shifted slightly. It started as something small, his lips grazing her temple, his fingers soothing her hair away from her face. He lingered there, memorized every detail. She stared at the touch, a quiet breath escaping, but her eyes stayed shut. His heart raced, half afraid to wake her, half hoping. When she finally shifted towards him, not fully awake but seeking his warmth, his breath caught. He pressed his forehead to hers, lips brushing. And in that moment, the room felt infinite, the night stretching out just for the two of them, his heart beating fast against hers, love. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos.